And on behalf of the staff and volunteers of the Clinton Foundation and the Clinton School of Public Service, welcome to Bridge Builders, Conversations with Interesting People. My name is Katrina Owa, and I serve as the Chief Financial Officer for the Clinton Foundation. Thank you for joining us here on tonight at the Clinton Presidential Center as we celebrate Women's History Month on International Women's Day. Tonight's conversation features influential women in Arkansas who are leading their respective organizations through this period of uncertainty, activism, and change. On our panel, we are so pleased to welcome Heather Albright, Senior Vice President and Senior Relationship Manager in Middle Market at Bank of America and President of Bank of America, Arkansas, Chancellor Christina S. Drell of UA Little Rock, and Sharice West Scantleberry, CEO of the Winthrop Rockefeller Foundation. And our moderator is Dr. Victoria DeFrancesco Soto, the Dean of the University of Arkansas Clinton School of Public Service. She is the first Latina dean at a presidential institution. Vicki is also a political analyst for NBC News and Telemundo. Prior to joining the Clinton School, she served as assistant dean at the LBJ School of Public Affairs at the University of Texas at Austin. To our stage panelists, thank you for taking time out of your busy schedules to participate in this timely conversation. And to each of you, thank you for attending in person and tuning in online. I'll turn the program over to Vicki. Thank you.
Thank you, Katrina, and thank you to all of you for joining us tonight on this rainy night. But I can't tell you how special it is to see your faces, to see you here present in community with us. So for that, I want to extend a very special thank you and a very special welcome. We have endured a crisis over the last 2 years. I know for many of us, the last in-person event we attended was probably around this time in 2020. We're starting to see a light at the end of the tunnel in terms of our global pandemic, yet regrettably, we're in the midst of another crisis, the crisis of democracy. I know that we all have the Ukraine at the top of mind, and as we commemorate this very special International Women's Day, I want to take a special moment to think of our Ukrainian sisters. Women the world over are bold and fearless. And with us tonight, we have three of these women who fight for equity, for inclusion, for diversity, for systematic and paradigm change. I am honored to have you all with me, and I could not think of a better way to celebrate International Women's Day. So with that, I want to jump in because I know we got a lot of questions, both from you here and those on Zoom, so I promise I will get to most of them. But I want to start at the beginning. I want to start understanding how you became a rock star. What was, yeah, you are. What was that journey? What was that path to leadership? And I want to put a twist on that. I asked you all to prepare for your path to leadership, but I also want you to talk to us about the bumps in the road. You were all very accomplished women, but I'm not going to believe you if you told me that it was all easy peasy. What were those bumps in the road in your path to leadership that made you a stronger and more effective leader? And Christy, you're right next to me, so I'm going to start with you.
Well, I have to start out by admitting that my path to leadership was, at least from my perspective when I started, purely accidental. I mean, I really was not a person who had a clear path in mind, a clear call to leadership. I just pretty much showed up and answered the call to duty when it came. And I think also one of the things that made me, I think, open to those leadership opportunities was being a good listener. I was always tuning in to what was needed, what the challenges and opportunities were. And when those calls to duty came, I was ready. Mm-hmm. Now, I think at each time I got an opportunity to have a leadership position. I mean, when I graduated with my doctorate, I really just, my only ambition was to become a college professor and teach my classes and engage in the educational enterprise. And I did that. I did that for a number of years. But I also seemed to be drawn to these positions, to these opportunities of leadership. And so I stepped up and I did those. And I did them to the best of my ability. And one thing led to another, and here I am. So I can't say that it was a plan, but it was, I think, if not intentional, at least responsive to the environment that I was in.
Charisse.
So similarly, I didn't have a plan either. In fact, I'm actually surprised I lead anything. And people put confidence in me. So my path to leadership started, I grew up in public housing in Baltimore, and my mother had to work. And at 5 or 6 years old, 6, 7 years old, very early in elementary school, I had to take care of me and my sister. And so that's where the leadership started. I had to navigate us to and from school. Sometimes I had to fight to get there and fight to get back home. Had to ward off all that was going on in that particular community at that time. And but it was through growing up in public housing that my passion or my desire to this quest of how do you make communities the best communities they can be for children and families. Just because you grow up in public housing doesn't mean you should have roaches and rats. Just because you're low income doesn't mean you should live in squalor. That should not happen. You don't deserve to live a certain way because of your income. And so just that quest for, like, how do you change this? Why is it this way to begin with? And how did all of this happen? And so that then led me on the quest. So my leadership was less about me becoming a leader than it was about how does that happen? Like, how does that transformation in a community happen? And it started out in urban communities through my work at the Annie Casey Foundation, eventually rural when I moved to Louisiana and then here. And yeah, so that's my path to leadership. It all started in growing up and watching my mother, and because now that's my first example of leadership, and watching her lead and navigate us through our lives. And I didn't have a career path at all. Like I said, I'm grateful that God put me on a path, because I sure didn't have one. And thus that path to philanthropy. And it's worked out well so far.
Heather.
Yeah, so I would say that I've always had the ambition and the drive to want to be a leader. I'm like you, a little surprised, honestly, to be here at this point in my life. And I sometimes get that reaction of my age, like it's not just an issue of gender. But I think for me, I love to learn, and that's never stopped. That started when I was really, really young, just this curiosity to just understand how things work, to learn more from other people. And I think that did have many bumps along the way, for sure, but I had mentors that really poured into me and helped me. And I have many that I mentor, and I think that's so important. And I learn from them. They're not just learning from me. And so it's been a very intentional process. But I've also had to kind of sidestep. I had a little bit of a straight vision of what I wanted to do. And being in Arkansas and working for such a large company as Bank of America, when I was ready for the next step, that position wasn't necessarily available. You have to kind of wait till somebody retires or somebody else gets promoted. And so it really gave me the opportunity to do all the extras, take on extra projects, lead other groups, work on other things outside of my true kind of day job of what I was asked to do with the bank. And I learned so much through that process. And I also learned early on to invest in other people. Every position that I ever received within the bank, I was very quickly, as soon as I learned it, I was training that next person to take my position. I've never been protective of my knowledge or my experience. I've always wanted to share that with the next person, because I never feared that they could, take my job from me. I wanted to make sure when there was another opportunity for me that I had somebody ready to step in and to take the position that I had. And I've been able to just kind of continue that on. It's got me here today.
And this position that you have, Heather, I do want to take a moment to celebrate that almost exactly a year ago today, you were named the first female president of Bank of America in Arkansas, the first. So,
Yes,
let's celebrate.
thank you. Thank you.
Look, I'm a nerdy professor. I take notes. Listen, ask the questions, and love to learn. The common denominator here of this leadership that we're seeing from these women here is to learn, to ask the questions. Sometimes I think we assume a leader comes in and imposes their way and directs, and you lead by dictate. But what we're really seeing, and the most effective leadership, and what us women are quite good at, is that listening, is that learning, is that asking of the questions. Now, even though women in our college classrooms make up the majority of our students, we know that we don't have parity across the board. One sector where we're far from parity is in the financial services. And Heather, I was in preparation for tonight, I was reading up a recent McKinsey report. So in your financial services sector, banking, insurance, you have a majority of women entering at the entry level. Okay. But when you get up to the C-suite, when you get up to where you are, Heather, less than 1/3 of those executives are women, and even less persons of color. So there's a leaky pipeline. Talk to me, Heather, about what you have observed in terms of that pipeline, why it is so leaky. And you started to touch on this too, about the mentorship piece, but intentionally, what can we be doing to stop the holes in that pipeline?
I think a lot is just that encouragement and helping other people, because at Bank of America, I feel really, really fortunate to work at this company because we have 50% of our workforce are women. And as you said, a lot of times that's considered to be that lower level position. But we also have 50% of our board of directors is minority or a female. And so we really have supported that within. But I think the biggest thing that we can do is to encourage others, give them the confidence. Sometimes it's hard I've been in many meetings where I walked in the room and there may be 15 men in that room and I'm the only female in that room. And it can be intimidating. And what it takes, I think, is confidence. And how you get that is preparation. Like I would probably guarantee that I knew the material and the topic in and out better than most of them because I felt like I had to work harder to earn my spot there. And I think what we can all do is to help encourage, give them the opportunities to others that work with or even in lower levels to just be in the room with you, just observe, and you gain confidence and you gain, that knowledge and that seeking that. I think it is so important. I feel like as a leader, I have an obligation to help not just women, but especially women, because I have been being the first female president of the bank. That's not abnormal for us and a lot of other markets within Bank of America. But let's be honest, it was kind of surprising to be in Arkansas. So we tend to unfortunately be a little bit behind. But I think the pandemic, as you mentioned earlier, it has really intensified that. It's very concerning to me because we know that we've had a lot of people exit the workforce in the last 2 years. And let's be honest, you can look at any report you read, any research, the majority of those have been women. Because many of us had obligations that we had to do. I myself am a working parent. I've got 2 little kids. And when that switch flipped and I had to teach kindergarten and 3rd grade along with doing my job, to say that was a challenge is a very large understatement. But I think women were faced with more challenges of how to do that balance. And we didn't, in general, have as many options. And that's not right. We need to give everyone opportunities. And whether that's within the corporate place, we have, some more support or to help with childcare and some different things like that, because women or anyone shouldn't be put in a position that you have to make a choice, whether to be a good parent or to be successful in your career. I think we should be able to do both.
So when the pandemic hit, my littlest one was in kindergarten and the other was in 2nd grade. So, and I am in a very privileged position, and it was so difficult. But the truth of the matter is things were not good before. When we look at our childcare system, when we look at a lot of our infrastructure in terms of care, in terms of support of women, it was already rickety. And you mentioned, Heather, opportunities, right? That if anything, COVID has kind of centered us on what do we do in terms of opportunity. So, Cherise, I want to talk to you about the role of philanthropy. And the last event I was able to take part in before, kind of the world stopped and the pandemic hit, was I got to have a conversation with Darren Walker from the Ford Foundation. He had just finished his book, From Generosity to Justice, A New Gospel of Wealth. So a re-examination of Andrew Carnegie's classic, A Gospel of Wealth. And really taking philanthropy to task and saying, okay, what types of opportunities are you going to give? Where is justice within this opportunity? Is it just something that you give people to get by, or is it changing the source of how they are able to become more involved in economic ability? Cherise, what are you looking at when you're looking at justice and the intersection with philanthropy?
Sure. So there's a choice that you can make with your foundation or your philanthropy. You have a choice. There's a choice of being very charitable, which is beautiful, of giving because your heart tells you to give to good causes for good reasons. Everyone in this room is a philanthropist. Everyone who is watching via Zoom, assuming you're using Zoom and not something else, watching is a philanthropist. Anytime that you give at your church, anytime that you give buy Girl Scout cookies, everyone is a philanthropist and has the opportunity to do so, right, in that sense. Then you have what is organized philanthropy, where, you know, you have to ask the question again. You can give to food banks and hunger relief, which is wonderful, perfectly, and that needs to happen. But then someone has to ask, why is there hunger? Or ask, why aren't the school systems doing well? Or ask, you know, why isn't there adequate childcare? You know, the why question. And not all foundations want to ask the why question. And that's what Darren gets at in his book, is, you know, like, how do we use our dollars to do the charitable work? Because let's be clear, we need bookmobiles, we need food bank, all of that stuff is needed. Please continue to give, please continue to do that, right? But there also is, and government isn't good at asking why. And government isn't good at asking, how do I disrupt myself, meaning government, my system, to serve all people well? I'm not saying they don't do it, I'm saying they don't do it well. And so, because thus you have the disproportionate outcomes. And so at the Winthrop Rockefeller Foundation, that is the approach that we take to our grant making, is asking the root causes of why Arkansas isn't as prosperous as we would hope it to be. And so we focus our grant making on equity, trying to achieve equity, on wanting to fund and support that disruption of systems so that we can change our outcomes. And our focus is around education equity, social, ethnic, and racial equity, and economic equity. And I can give some examples of what that is. But for us, it's doing that kind of grant making that the board looked at that as root causes of why we're not as prosperous as we want to be, and to give our grant making in a way that has a multiplier effect. So thus our focus on systems and advocacy and organizing and public policy and the like. Government has way more money than the Winthrop Rockefeller Foundation does. But how do we you know, work in a way and do our grant making in a way that empowers our grantees and empowers and gives voice to those who don't have voice to shake up, disrupt, you know, and challenge those systems.
And Cherise, I can imagine, though, that there may be some frustration in saying it might be a longer time horizon when you're empowering people and when you're getting at the root causes and the institutional piece rather than the bookmobile or whatnot. There's a lag in terms of the effect that you see. Is that something that you struggle with in trying to change that mindset?
The answer is yes. It is, and again, I don't want to make it sound like we don't fund that other stuff, because we do. But you know, majority of our focus is on that systemic change, and it is long term, and it is slow, patient capital. It is that long term investing, and that's where some of our foundation colleagues want quick gratification. We all have boards that we have to answer to, and those boards want quick gratification. However, you know, to support or to work on, again, if we talk about childcare, if we talk about, we talk about ALICE workers, asset limited, income constrained, employed. That's the who of who we do our grant making for at the foundation. Close to 50% of Arkansans are asset limited, income constrained, employed. They're working, Arkansans are working 2-3 jobs, but do not make enough to make ends meet. Just simply cannot do their basic, meet their basic needs. And so to focus on those families, again, doing the charitable work for those families is great, but you know, a low income tax credit is better. You know, funding and supporting advocacy to ensure that we can get to living wage has a longer term effect. How do we ensure that those the kids of ALICE, you know, do get a quality education? Those are the ways in which we look at that long-term multiplier effect, in addition to program demonstrations and the like that we also fund. But for us, it is that long-term patient capital is what we call it, but grant making, and pretty hefty investments to see systemic change. Because it's through systemic change that we can change Arkansas based on our theory of change.
Thank you, Cherise. Christy, you were brought in to right the ship. And then the pandemic hit. And even with the pandemic, you have righted the ship at University of Arkansas Little Rock, and you're trucking. So I want to talk about the future, because the ship is already on the path. I want to look ahead. And I've been lucky enough to have a conversation with you about the future, but in particular, your view of higher ed in the 21st century. Before the pandemic, we needed to rethink higher ed. And like with many things, the pandemic kind of pushed us to speed up that timeline. So I want you to challenge us, to push us about how we can be more effective in higher ed and meeting people where they are.
Well, I think that's really what UA Little Rock is all about. We're, an urban institution, and our student population is the population that for whom transformation is really a life-changing experience, that education is that life-changing experience. So equity is a big part of what we do as well. And so we have, and you're right, the pandemic didn't create the situation where we have to look at what changes are coming. It really just accelerated it. I think in the 21st century, as we move forward, there will be different kinds of institutions, but institutions like ours are going to have to make sure that we do meet students where they are, but we have to concentrate on a couple of things. First, we have to concentrate on improving equitable access to education. And a lot of that is about making it affordable. Everyone knows that the price of a college education has gone up, and lots of states are looking at how to bring that price point back down for all students, but particularly for students who otherwise might not be able to manage those price tags. So we're doing that at UA Little Rock. We're concentrating very hard on increasing our endowment, increasing other kinds of opportunities to lower the price point, the net price, which is the actual cost of attendance, and to really make those systemic changes at that level, just in terms of getting people in the door. Because we think that once we get them there, well, we know that once we get students in the door, we can make a huge difference in their social mobility, in their opportunities. And another part of the way that we do that is not just to get them in the door, but to make sure that they have the wraparound services to support their success once they get there. So we work very hard on making sure that we have all of those kinds of support services in place. And also, the other piece to that, as this sort of three-legged stool, you might say, is to make sure that we have the connections to the community that help those students see, while they're still in school, while they're still in the classroom, what the connection is between what they're doing in the classroom and where they're going after they graduate. And you've probably all heard the expression, you can't be what you can't see. And so we need to make sure that those students can see where they're going, or the possibilities of where they can go. And they can do that by interacting with people in industry and in philanthropy and in government and in education and all of the sectors, to interact with those people already in those professions, through internships, through capstone courses, whatever it is. But we want to make sure they have those experiential learning opportunities to make those connections, because we know that once they do, they're very likely to persist. They're very likely to stay in school, to keep going, to graduate, and to move on to successful careers. So that is a kind of systemic change that education can be about, and that I think that we need to be about moving forward. And I think that Arkansas needs us to be about, in order to increase educational attainment in Arkansas, and frankly, to grow the economy of Arkansas. That doesn't happen without people getting some kind of post-secondary education, whether it is a more focused technical training or whether it's higher ed or a four-year university. But that is all good for Arkansas, because having those people go into the economy ready to be successful, ready to excel and be promoted through the ranks to the level of president or CEO, that's what will make this state strong.
Christy, you touched on student services. And you're a modest person, so I'm going to brag on you. The last Board of Trustees meeting was hosted here in Little Rock, University of Arkansas, Little Rock. And I loved your presentation, where you went through the suite of services that you have created. Because, you know, education is about the classroom and the learning and the pedagogy, but it's also about life. It's also about providing mental wellness, healthcare. It's about providing childcare. It's about providing work-study opportunities. So I think that what I so appreciate about you and about UA Little Rock is that whole student view that sets the student up for success. You don't just say, okay, here are your books, here's your class schedule, go for it. So Heather, Bank of America, bank, investing, ATMs, but a big piece of what B of A does, and also I know that what you do, is touching on philanthropy, more so in that economic development realm. And so I wanted you to talk us through that, especially with that lens on Arkansas. I know that you have a couple of programs, the economic mobility hubs, what you're doing with neighborhoods. Talk to us about what you're seeing and where you want to see it go.
Yeah, I would say that's the biggest responsibility that I took on as president, is being over our Bank of America Foundation, because we do have, you know, just as you said, you have to be really intentional about what we're going to do with these dollars. And it's hard because there are a lot of really, really good things out there. And so we do have a focus on certain things, you know, and through this pandemic, we made an announcement to spend $1.25 billion nationally, and we were, you know, so thankful to get those dollars here locally that are only used to help economic mobility and with a focus on diversity. That's kind of separate funding that we have. We have many different programs. We realize this is an issue. It's important, and we feel an obligation to give back. So here locally in Little Rock, at the end of last year, we actually were able to award our Neighborhood Champion Grant to Women's Foundation Arkansas. And it was very specific. So this is a grant that we do completely separate from our normal grant funding, and it's a multi-year funding, but we were able to give $50,000 for that economic mobility hub. And this program is only for Black women entrepreneurs. And I just really wanted to give them that support, because there is a disconnect on access to capital. And there is a disconnect, not about their skill, not about their ambition, but you have to have resources to do that. So the Women's Foundation gives them each a cash grant and doesn't tell them what to do with that money. They're able to use their discretion to do whatever they would like to with that money. And of course, there are a lot of leadership opportunities, training opportunities, and they're kind of by their side through this hub that they go through. So very proud to support that in terms of economic mobility. That's a really, really unique program, and one that we're proud to support.
You know, and it's that scalability, right? Because you said the desire to be entrepreneurial and to do innovative things is there, but it's the resources. And then once you have maybe that baseline, is how do you scale it up? So I think that's what's so important in terms of that systemic change. I want to come back to philanthropy and dig in a little bit more. We have Dr. Charlotte Williams here with us tonight, who's the director of the Clinton School Center for Community Philanthropy. And one thing that I have learned from Charlotte, and also in talking to Charisse, is how unique and special it is what the what the foundation does here and what our center does is in the focus of the South. Because there are centers on philanthropy across the country. There's about 24 of them. My last institution had one. But even though the South is a focus for dollars to come into, what about the people who are homegrown here dictating what it is that those needs really are and being able to have that lived experience? And so, Cherise, can you talk to us about this homegrown vision of philanthropy and how you're investing? And you started to get into the detail of some of the programs you're doing, like the child tax credit. So I want you to nerd out. I want you to tell us more so we can understand also, for when we come to our call to action, how we can support that and further that.
Sure. So actually, if I could, sorry, I got a runaway mic. We worked with the Women's Foundation on the study that they did about access to capital for women, but also the foundation has done an access to capital study. And again, when we talk about institutions, we found that as it related to SBA, particularly, that less than 2% of those loans went to women and people of color. And so banking is one of those systems, or banking is an actual institution that that isn't as accessible to women and people of color. And so there has to be some intentionality in working with banks. One, to point out that challenge, because that's a statistic that some probably didn't realize. But then how do we work together on that? So one example that you and I talked about was we have this initiative called Delta Owned.
Yeah.
And with Delta Owned, again, relating back to the banking system, when the first PPP loans, that first one in that June came out, we have data that supports that pretty much all of those dollars went to white male entrepreneurs. And in particular in the Delta, that hardly any people of color got them. And again, that's data, because you can go to the website and they list who got the grants, who got the money. So this isn't something I'm making up. You can go find this out and fact check. And so we got a couple calls from the Delta that said, wow, we don't, and the reason they couldn't is because they didn't have the relationships. And the inside scoop, and the trust and the, so when people of color and women were approaching those banks for those loans, they were strangers, because they just didn't have those relationships. And there are other reasons too, but long-term systemic reasons of discrimination and the like against women and people of color with bank loans and all that. But there has to be intentionality. So we worked with a group of organizations in the Delta, and they created what is now known as Delta Owned. And similar to what you described with the Women's Foundation, that the community came together and they actually created an approach to how they could get dollars out to entrepreneurs of color and women entrepreneurs in the Delta. And through small grants, just giving them that cash assistance most immediately to keep their businesses going, but also coupling that with technical support. And in addition to the technical support, then helping them build the relationships with those banking institutions in that region, so that by the time that next round came about, they were pretty ready to participate. Again, not at the scale that we would have liked, and it wasn't as equitable as it should have been, but nonetheless, we're able to participate. And so, so that's like a very community-driven approach. Phone call came in. How can we be responsive? How can something that I'm sure no one intended for that first round to be inequitable, right? I don't think there was intent, but that is what occurred, because this banking system is a system that works for men mainly, and white men in particular, right? Again, not my data. That data's out there. So penetrating that becomes tough, but that's an example during COVID where we were able to be responsive to community needs. And it's far more in depth than that, but because I only have 5 minutes to describe this, and other people want to speak on the panel, but that's an example of responsive philanthropy. And, and we had the relationships in the community. There was trust with WRF, to participate and to make it happen. Since then, it has grown significantly. SBA works with Delta-owned works with the Delta-owned program to dispense its loans. And there's a relationship there that wasn't there before. So again, when we talk about connecting systems and community, there's a relationship there that wasn't there before. And, and trying to work together to make those changes there in that community. And then, if I can, there's one other, but I can go on, but I won't. The other is, most recently, you all have probably seen where WRF, the Arkansas Community Foundation, Hope Community Credit Union, and others pooled some resources for medical debt relief. Whereby we were able to work with RIP, Debt Rest in Peace. It's a corporation that buys mortgages, buys debt, medical debt on the secondary market. And through that grant making, we were able to close to 25,000 Arkansans able to wipe out, their medical debt. And that's the kind of grant making that we do that, directly affects families and the like. However, there's also a public policy part to that, because that's also scalable and doable. But more importantly, that medical debt and the way in which it is perpetuated, there's changes in the systems that we could make that could alleviate many families' medical debt. And so while we do the direct relief, we also are working on a policy front on that as well.
Community, trust, data. Shameless plug, but at the Clinton School, at the center, at the Clinton School, we start with the data because we can tell you whatever story we want. But at the end of the day, when you do an impact analysis, when you look at the data, the numbers will speak for themselves. And that's what gives us power, and that's what gives us voice, and then allows the community to be mobilized and build those relationships that can change systems, that can change that.
And again, with that data, you can know what questions to ask.
And so while we're talking about philanthropy, another thing that I just feel is such a big responsibility. So I spoke about the money that we give and the grants that we make, and that's crucial. It's very, very important. But I think another responsibility that we all have, and something that we take very seriously at Bank of America, is actually giving of our time, volunteering. And so we have a platform. So when you're talking about the PPP loan, so at the banker, I'm very involved with helping my clients, help get those PPP loans. But sometimes it's about education. And so we, Bank of America, partner with Khan Academy. I'm sure some of you with kids, unfortunately, we just know a lot about Khan Academy, trying to help our kids do their schoolwork. But we partnered and developed a program called Better Money Habits. And it's a free, and you could, anyone could go out there and see, but we deliver that program to many nonprofits to help with, and it can be very basic to, people that don't even have a checking account, learning how to build a budget, don't have a credit score, how to fix your credit score, just some really basic up through some more complex financial education piece that's so important. So it's not just about giving money, very important, but also of just giving our time and taking time to stop. And we kind of make assumptions sometimes that people just know how to do all these things, and that when those PPP loans were out, they just had the access and were going to go do it. But quite honestly, sometimes it was just the partnerships with the bank, but also just the education around it.
Wrap around.
Yep.
All right, I promised that we would get to our audience questions because I have a couple of pages of them. And so I'm going to make good on my promise. And this question I want to direct to you, Christy, which is, given the multitudes of uncertainty, COVID, now we're dealing with the crisis in the Ukraine, what is your greatest concern? And how does that affect your institution's, UALR's priorities?
So disruption and change can be a good thing for an organization. And I think it can be good for education. My worry is that a sustained disruption can turn into chaos. And that can really start to bring people down, and it creates too much uncertainty, too much disruption, and then things start breaking down and people start breaking down. Now, I'm an optimist. I'm very hopeful that we will get past the point of sort of constant disruption. But I will say that it has, as I said before, it's accelerated change, not necessarily produced it from scratch. We were already, higher education already has to be in the online business, and it's been in that business for, at least a couple of decades or more. And so that just in time, anytime, anywhere aspect of online education is not going to go away. So we have to keep doing that, and we have to be good at it. Now, I believe that there is still going to be room for brick and mortar in-person universities, and I think that particularly for universities that serve underrepresented groups, that's going to be critical, because those wraparound services that I was talking about before are going to be even more important in those environments. You can think of it kind of as analogous to the whole health movement, where you don't just treat, one symptom here and one symptom there. You really have to look at the whole student and understand what that student needs holistically. And so I really see us moving in that direction, but also using what we've learned from disruption and from change to adjust our business model so that we can also provide education in more unbundled ways, sort of like in the entertainment industry, that those things became unbundled and the market changed. Education's going to have to do that too. So I see in the future that we're going to have to be way more versatile and have different kinds of educational products that meet the needs of the market. All of our students, or I should say most of our students work, and most of them work full time. So we have to be versatile, and we have to be able to provide those different kinds of educational modalities. But we also have to understand who our students are in this place and this time, and take that holistic approach as well. So I think that going forward is going to be equally important.
I'm also an optimist by nature, Christy, and I'm also very biased because I share your worldview, and I say amen to everything you have said, that we need to meet students where they are, and that education is not a one-size-fits-all enterprise. It's not always if you build it, they will come, because they may just stay home, they may not come. And really, as I think about advancement for women, for working mothers, we need to meet them where they are. I have another very interesting question here about Central Arkansas, about how we can grow our city, make our city be viewed more positively. We seem to be low on too many lists. Most recently, the survey of the availability of STEM jobs, for example. So how can we boost up Central Arkansas? How can we get Little Rock up there in those lists? And so on this question of STEM and pipeline, Heather, I'm going to ask you to talk us about that and women in these fields of finance and math and STEM.
Mm-hmm. So a lot about the support for education and that so many students work full-time. I actually went to graduate school in the evenings. I worked full-time at Stevens investment banking firm and was fortunate enough to have an employer that supported me and helped me through that. And I love that so many more companies are doing that tuition reimbursement for their employees that work full-time, because that was a rough couple years. I'm not going to lie, work full-time and to go to school in the evening. And to have that support is crucial. And we at Bank of America have a tuition reimbursement program, but talking about just like what changed because of the pandemic, I think that's the important thing, is that we learn from that. So one thing that changed at our company, and I would love to see so many others do this, is that we've always had a tuition reimbursement. So you needed to pay for school, you needed to complete the class, make whatever grade, and then the company would pay you back, which is how a typical tuition reimbursement program. And through this pandemic, we changed the program at the bank and said, Well, you might not have that $4,000 you need to pay for your tuition
Right.
and then to get that money reimbursed. So we're going to shift our program. And if you want to pursue your education, we want to support you, and we'll give you the money on the front end so that you can pay for your tuition. And then, of course, you do have to complete the course and still meet those requirements. But I think that's a game changer for so many people who don't have that money, even if their employer has that kind of program. So I would love to see so many more programs out there, but specifically around the STEM jobs and females in the workplace. We have a summer internship program, and it's Girls That Code, and I love it because we take high school students that are in the last couple years of school, put them in summer programs, and pair them with female engineers, female entrepreneurs that learn, how to code, robotics, and those type of programs, just to get that interest. As you said before, I mean, you have to have that interest in you to say, I don't just want to get an education. I've actually been side by side with somebody who did that job, and I loved it, and I have something to work towards. And I think that's so important to make that connection and to invest in those types of programs that give students the opportunities to hands-on actually get to just be by their side and learn from them. I think it's really important.
It's critical. During the pandemic, I was fortunate enough to work on a report for the YWCA, looking at women in the midst of COVID and how do we chart our path to recovery. And STEM was one of the biggest pieces. Like even before the pandemic, we knew that we were losing women. At around third grade, they would veer off from STEM. We need them back because of the disproportionate numbers that we were seeing once you got up into college, into graduate school, but especially because we know that in the fourth industrial revolution, the bulk of the jobs are going to have some sort of STEM component. And what was precipitated by the pandemic, because like you said, Christy, it's not necessarily that something came out of the blue, but we know that AI and technology is going to play a bigger and bigger role. And if we don't step it up, if we don't get our women prepared, we're going to fall further and further behind. So we're talking STEM, we're talking paradigm shifts, transition, but at the end of the day, we need to be well, to take care of others, and to continue to lead, to continue to listen, to continue to ask questions. And I want to ask a question of all of you about self-care and mentorship and things that you do to cultivate your space and to cultivate your power and to cultivate your energy. Sharice, let me start with you.
I'm sorry. So you may have to ask that question again because I'm still stuck on the last question. And it's not so much stuck, but just one thing I was not going to say, but I feel compelled. We actually know how we can chart a path to get to what you just described. We do. We know how we need to educate kids for STEM. We know that resources need to be put there. We know, but where is the will? One. And then where is this is not working. Let me just look this straight in the face. It's not working and it needs to change. And one thing that Heather said when she was introducing herself that I heard, you said you built your confidence, but you also took risks.
Absolutely.
And it means risk taking. But when you are the one saying we need to change, like you said earlier, when you're the one pushing that, that is not welcomed. And it is not always welcome coming from a woman. And so how can Central Arkansas stop being where it is? Although I'm not trying to say we should all have all women legislators and the like, but if you got that out of what I just said, that's okay too. But it's not so much that as it is, taking a hard look at ourselves and making the change, and that taking that risk and digging into how we can use resources differently and how we can, program differently, like that's hard. I was in a meeting earlier today. We support Forward Arkansas, and they talked about going to different schools and looking at the educator preparation programs and doing some assessments of those programs and providing those assessments to various institutions. And when you provide those assessments, the first thing people do is reject what's there, right? They reject the data. Well, that's because of this. Well, it was a bad day. Well, you didn't look at this. Well, versus taking a deep breath and going, you know, I got a jacked up program and I need to fix it. You know? And that's not always easy to do. And so for me, the challenge would be, you know, how do we take a hard look, like a hard assessment, hard audits of what it is that we're doing that keeps us where we are, because clearly we're doing something. And then making the change. And when you do, and when you are that person pushing and advocating and talking about these issues, it's rarely welcomed. Rarely welcome. And it takes such a huge risk and such a huge toll to be that person or sets of persons who try to advocate for that.
All right, you just spurred like another 3 questions. All right, we got another 2 hours. Let me pick up on 2 of those. Risk. I'm going to switch really quickly from self-care, but we'll get to that, but to risk. But I do want to pick up on the elected piece, because this was one of the questions that was put by an audience member, and it's near and dear to my heart. The question reads, as a former legislator in Arkansas, I was distressed to read today, the 1st of March, that Arkansas ranks 41st in the nation in women elected to serve in the state house. A record number of women have filed this season, but how can we get more women elected? Arkansas, regrettably, is not the only one. Texas, my former home state, also toward the bottom of the barrel, other states in the region. And I do want to underscore what you said, that we need change and risk-taking from all of these different pieces. I'm very proud that I worked together to form a campaign school, a nonpartisan campaign school. I'm hoping that the Clinton School can work together with the LBJ School and with other entities, but at the end of the day, we need to ask our women to run. We need our women in banking, we need our women in philanthropy and education, but also at the end of the day, at the seat at the table. So that was my soapbox, but that is a passion project of mine, of getting women to run to affect all of these areas of change. Now back to risk, because I do love risk. But I'm going to start with you, Christy, because you're closest to me. Give me one risk, one big risk that you took.
Well, you know, to your point, I had to face my university and say, we have to right-size this university. Was not a welcome message. It was very difficult, and I said, and we have to be intentional about it. For many years, the model of budget balancing was to cut across the board and just sort of go to everybody's maintenance accounts and cut 5% out or what have you. And I said, we have to take a hard look at ourselves and see what's working, what's not working, and we have to see what is relevant, what's not relevant, what our community needs and wants from us. And that's not something you do overnight. I mean, we did a first round of that, and we're still doing it. We're still working on that academic planning process and the institutional planning process. But that was the first step, was to say, we need to make some big changes here. We need to balance our budget. We can't go on the way we are. And so we did it. And we survived it, and we were stronger for it, I believe. But that was a big risk, because I could have been run out of town on a rail very easily, and I was not, thankfully. But that was a pretty big risk, primarily because it had never been done before. Not at least in Arkansas.
Cherise.
I've taken many, so I was sitting here like, oh my gosh, which one? So the one that comes to mind, I was selected to be the head of the Louisiana Disaster Recovery Foundation, which is now the Foundation for Louisiana, that was born out of Rita and Katrina, and to, you know, work with others to start that foundation at that moment in crisis. And that was a huge risk, just simply the nature of the work. And again, just kind of fighting our way through what we needed to do to make sure that the folks in Louisiana that were affected by the disaster had some resources.
Thank you. Heather.
Well, in banking, especially the lending component, that's the business we're in, right?
Yeah.
Is the risk reward balance, is like taking, you know, measured, calculated risks. What are the rewards? I, like you, love risk. I just don't think you're going to get that high reward if you don't take those risks, and you have to put yourself out there. Being very intentional, doing all your homework, really understanding that you're taking the right risks are important. But for me in my career, I had this really defined path that I wanted to go on. And I am in commercial banking, and I was in the group that I was in, and I was kind of stuck. You know, I kind of used that stuck as like I was ready to do the next thing, but there really wasn't the next thing. But I was offered a position to move into a different group. And I was concerned. It was kind of the unknown. I was the first person in Arkansas to have that job. And it was just like, I don't know if I should do this. And I actually went to Donnie Cook, who was the prior president of Bank of America, and talked to him about it. And he really encouraged me to take that risk. And he said, you know, I know, but I really think you can do it. Like, I think you can handle this. And he's like, you know, worst case, think about what you'll learn while you have this job. You'll be more marketable. You'll just be positioned so well for that. I took that risk, did that job for 3 years, and then ended up in the job that I have today. So it worked out perfectly for me. But I had to get out of my comfort zone for sure to take on that role and to work in an entirely different group. But it paid off.
You all took the risk, you took that jump, but you were incredibly prepared in taking that risk and taking that jump.
Well, and still failed along the way. At least I did.
Which prepares you even more
Which
so,
prepares
I would
you for
argue.
even more.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Those
You learn
errors,
more
those
from
bumps,
failures.
more,
Yeah,
yeah.
absolutely.
bumps in the road. I see Bridget waving at me, the 5-minute mark. So in the Bridge Builder series, there's always a call to action, and I'm going to put my own professor twist on it and ask you all to give homework to our folks here in the audience and to those watching on Zoom in terms of what we can do right now in thinking about supporting women, advocating for women here domestically and abroad globally, whether it's in education, in philanthropy, in economic services, STEM. What is your call to action? And Heather, I'm going to start with you at the far end over there.
Yeah. So for me, the call to action is it takes a village, let's be honest. And so for a lot of women, you know, myself very much included, strong, independent women, we're afraid to ask for help. And even when offered help, we're afraid to accept the help because we are worried that it's going to be perceived as a weakness. So my call to action is to accept the help, ask for help, because there's absolutely no way I would be here today without the support system I have within the company, as well as my family and my friends. And it's not a weakness to ask for help. It's actually a strength because you can accomplish so much more. So I hate that there's so much emphasis put on that you should just do it all by yourself. I don't agree with that anymore. I had to learn that one the hard way, as you said, make some mistakes along the way to get here. So that's my call to action.
My call to action would be to go to AliceInArkansas.org and learn about Alice families in our state, because a significant number of them are women-led households, and to be a voice, advocate, and champion for those sets of policies and approaches that work for our Alice families, not against them, but for our Alice families. I need you to hashtag See Alice in Arkansas.
I would ask people to find a way to partner with, engage with, get involved with education on some level, and particularly in ways that help young people see what the opportunities are. If you own a business, if you are in a particular industry, get involved early. You don't have to go to just universities. Go to the public schools and participate in Career Day or whatever it is. It's really important for young people to be able to see what those pathways are, what those opportunities are. So we always would welcome partners and at our institution to work with us to provide experiential learning opportunities. And so that's really important to us. And I have two pieces of
The more homework, the better.
2 pieces of homework. The other piece is to find a way to support universal childcare.
Yes.
Because that, and it's for women, but it's also for men, because really that is a huge barrier to to opportunity for many, many young families. And we just don't do it. Well, we don't do it at all in some cases. We certainly don't do it well. I mean, in exploring this issue, I discovered that the laws in our state and the certification process for people who work in early childhood education basically are set up to work against the whole enterprise.
Right.
The low pay, the
Yes.
extra work that you have to do to get certified, it's not part of a regular teaching certificate. So, and it's not something you can just kind of go out and fix tomorrow. But I think just as a voice of unity to advocate for early childhood education and universal child care, that would be a huge game changer for women, for people of color, for low-income families, you name it. That is going to be a really important linchpin in this whole operation.
We have our call to action. Ask for help. Provide help through advocating for universal child care, early child care education, and visit alice.org. I will make sure that the Clinton School, we put that up on our social media channels so people can follow up on that homework. I want to thank all of you for tuning in and for sharing this evening with us, this moment. It was so good to be here in person with you, and there is more to come. Thank you and good night.
Thank you.